Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Max Warframe, where today we're going to be taking a look at the newest Prime secondary weapon on the block, the Spira Prime. Now the Spira Prime got off to a rocky start, with some stats that didn't quite seem, just didn't seem real. So much so that it was worse than the standard Spira in almost every single way, which was super bizarre. However, along came hotfix 18.4.13 and changed the game entirely for it. So how does it stack up against the standard Spira now? Well, it comes with a lower base damage of 47 compared to the standard 55, with the majority 37.6 coming in the form of puncture, 4.7 as both impact and slash, which I know from this point of view it doesn't look great. And I've seen a lot of people throw around only the base damage when we're talking about whether the Spira Prime is better than the standard Spira. I mean, that, to be honest, even after the buff people are still doing this. However, they neglect to look at the fact that it has a higher crit chance of 30% compared to the standard 25, higher crit damage of 250% compared to the standard 200, higher status chance of 10% compared to 5%, faster fire rate 3.33 compared to 2.5, larger magazine size of 12 compared to 10, and even faster reload of 0.75 compared to 1 second. Now, it doesn't have it all its own way though. It does have a couple of downsides. Firstly is the fact that with it being a thrown weapon, it does have a ballistic curve to the throw, as well as the inaccuracy that the original Spira has got as well, with the first shot going pretty much on target, and the second going towards the bottom of the aiming reticule. So when aiming for headshots, remember your first shot is going to go for the head, second is always going to end up sort of pretty much the midriff of the target. Other than that, on extended missions, ammo consumption can be an issue if you're using this as a main weapon. Although switching to primary for a short time to rebuild ammo on the Spira Prime is always a good idea. In addition to that, with it being mostly puncture, it's going to have reduced effectiveness against shields and fleshy targets, so making sure you have the right elemental combo is always absolutely key to making this weapon in circumstances where it might normally struggle. Okay, so let's move on to starting to mod the Spira Prime. Now, it does come with 2 Vs as standard, however we're going to add another 5 former, which is going to be 3 Vs and 2 dashes. Now, in terms of our builds, we've got the majority of mods remaining the same between the 3 builds. So we've got Hornet Strike for damage, Barrel Diffusion for multi-shot, Lethal Torrent, which is going to improve our fire rate as well as give us more multi-shot. We've got Prime Pistol Gambit here for the extra crit chance, which is going to bring us up to 86% crit, which is one of the highest out of all of the prime weapons, in fact, all of the secondary weapons. We've got Prime Target Cracker, which is going to bring us up to a humongous 5.3 times critical multiplier, which is absolutely huge. And these 5 mods are remaining the same between the 3 builds. Now, in terms of elementals, we're going with 90% elementals. So we're going to go Prime Heated Charge and Convulsion for radiation, and Pathogen rounds, and this is going to be our Grineer build, which is focused around our very heavy Grineer. Now in terms of the corpus, Convulsion Deep Freeze for magnetic, and Pathogen rounds for toxin. Since this is mostly puncture, it's going to deal reduced damage against shields, so having the magnetic on there is really going to be useful, as well as the Pathogen rounds, which is just going to cut through those shields and take away their health directly. And for the Void, Convulsion Pathogen rounds for corrosive damage, and Primed Heated Charge for the extra heat damage. And then obviously if you're going to run Corrosive Projection Void, you can switch things around a little bit and go with the viral damage. I'm going to talk a little bit later about alternate mods. Obviously you've got things like Hydraulic Crosshairs. I wouldn't go with Concealed Explosives, it's an option, but I wouldn't do it personally. So Lethal Momentum's also an option because obviously the flight speed of the weapon. So, and Sharpened Bullets as well, crit damage. Personally, I wouldn't do this since stacking crit damage, as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, isn't usually really worth actually doing. So do I think the Spira Prime's worth the farm and former to max it? And the answer is absolutely yes it is. Put simply, it's one of the best secondaries in the game. I know people aren't fans of the enforced inaccuracy, or the arc of the weapon, but simply this is definitely just one of the strongest. To be honest, I've never been a huge fan of the throwing weapons. They've just been not really that great, or I've just not really enjoyed playing with them. But the Spira Prime do just what I want them to do, and they do it fantastically well. As you can see in the footage in the background, this sortie was possibly worst case scenario for the Spira Prime. Corpus, because it has a reduction, puncture has a reduction on shields, and the sortie thing was augmented shields, which means they have even more shields, and it's still killing pretty effectively and, efficiently regardless of that. The Spira Prime, it's one of the weapons that show how closely some people look at a weapon before they write it off as crap. Even after the buff, I've seen people making posts about how the normal Spira is better because the Prime has lower base damage, completely overlooking the supporting stats. Now this isn't good for anybody, and part of the reason that serious balancing concerns don't get listened to when feedback is presented. Please make sure if you want to provide good feedback to the devs, take everything into account first, because the amount of times I've seen forum posts with complete misinformation because people don't look at the whole stats is insane. The Spira Prime is an example of feedback done right. The original stats did in fact make it worse than the standard weapon, but with proper feedback within a week, the devs say they know the stats don't reflect the weapon and gave it a sizable buff. But, that mini rant out of the way, I just get frustrated with the fact that people spread misinformation. It just doesn't help anybody. But at the end of the day, the Spira Prime really are fantastic. I got used to the way they throw very quickly, and the fact that they are hugely customizable. You've got the ability to use hydraulic crosshairs to further boost the crit chance into red crit territory, and red crit pretty regularly. Or, while personally I wouldn't do this, you can use sharpen rounds to boost the crit damage. If you want to use either of those two mods, I would use hydraulic crosshairs, because hitting the head with one out of those two shots isn't that difficult to do, and that means more red crits for days. And at the end of the day, straight up buffing crit damage is almost always a waste. This is part of the problem with Hammer Shot, since more often than not having another elemental mod on the weapon with its current crit damage multiplier will be more effective than simply making the current elemental combo hit harder than it already does, especially if you don't have 100% crit on the weapon. Much like the Spira Prime does, it only gets around 86% with just the Prime crit mods. Now, a status build is also possible with this, since with 2 status mods you can hit around 50% status. Means about 1 or 2 shots, 1 out of 2 shots will proc status. But since this is an IPS weapon, the status isn't really high enough to me to warrant the elemental damage loss you're going to have to suffer to get that status build. Fire rate is also an option, although with the base fire rate increase coupled with lethal torrent, I would say it fires decently enough, decently fast enough, and personally if you team it up with carrier, you're going to have more than enough ammo to keep going for quite a while, even if you do switch to a primary to rebuild your secondary ammo a bit. But quite simply, the Spira Prime, it was the lame duck when it came into the game, worse than its standard counterpart. Now, with the buff, it's one of the best secondaries in the game. It's worth the horrible Tower 3 mobile defense RNG to eventually build it. Tell you what, I did 50 of those things, didn't get a single one, got fed up, went to the trade channel. But one of the best secondary weapons that will do exactly what you want and exactly what you need from it. As always, guys, many thanks for watching. Please remember to leave a like and subscribe, it helps me out a ton, and I shall see you in the next episode.